Welcome to the International Schools Podcast. I'm your co-host, John Mickton, and nice to be here again. It's the summer, so everybody has been relaxing, resting, taking some time off. And as the summer ends, and it's mid-August, so we're already starting to think about school. Many schools in Asia are already full on. So it depends where you are in the globe. You're very likely back into a new school year. And who knows where you thought AI would be when you left in June and where it is today. And that's kind of the ever-going, situation where you just can't keep up. And it's not really about keeping up. It's about finding the right place for you to start. And I think one of the things that many schools are doing, and every school is so different in its context and its situation, be it cultural and curriculum, AI definitely is a topic that everybody talks about. How schools engage with it, it is the spectrum. Some schools don't, some ban it, some engage with it, some are doing professional development internally, externally. They're talking about policies. There's no doubt this topic is still in the forefront, and I imagine in 25-26 academic year, it will stay there right in front and the center. So there are a lot of offerings out there for professional development and organizations that understand that educators in schools do need support, and that support has to be empathetic, it has to be caring, it has to be differentiated, and most importantly, has to be able to support this sense of feeling rushed and pushed, and do it in a way that's manageable for different teachers and different sections of the school that have different entry points, how they engage with lifelong learning. So today I have the privilege and pleasure, as I say to every guest that comes here, because it is truly an honor to have people come onto this podcast. I have two wonderful people that I actually got to meet Rachel many, many years ago. We kind of made this connection that Rachel actually worked for Dan and his organization, Apps EDU, and we very likely crossed paths at one of the earlier conferences we did in the Czech Republic. Rachel Bodily is an experienced international educator and the co-founder of Eblana Learning. With over a decade in IB school, she's taught MYP Mathematics, service learning, and really been focused on inclusive education. Her AI journey started early, really to get the concept of complex ideas to teachers and being able to break it down. And then after connecting with Rita, they created this organization called Eblana Learning to provide really clear, practical guidance to schools. And so Rachel is really full-time focusing on that with her partner and co-founder, Rita Bateson, who was a director of education at Eblana Learning and 2 decades of experience in international education. She's worked as a teacher, curriculum leader, and school head across Europe and beyond, and also has really been focused on empowering educators through curriculum design and principled leadership. She was a senior curriculum manager at the IB and the founding head of a secondary at Nord Anglia in Dublin. So she, with Rachel, have started Eblana Learning, and they're drawing their experiences from their schools and their different work they've done, and really trying to support schools in a way that AI is ethical, meaningful, and aligned with the IB values. So both of you, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. And I think the first thing I really want, I think everybody wants to know, you've had these successful careers in education, and then you decide to go and found your own company. What was the tipping point? Was there a tipping point that suddenly you said, okay, I'm giving everything up, my regular salary, all the benefits I have, and the stability, and I'm going to go and engage with this rapid rise of AI and really create something that is aligned with both of your beliefs? So I will let whoever wants to start first to start and kind of give us a little overview. What was the tipping point? Rita.
I think we had several. I think it's fair to say that there was no one singular moment where this was the journey and this was the decision. I'm always at my happiest either in a classroom or with a pen in my hand. So I've been curriculum development. And when I first met Rachel in a different project, in her previous role, I realized that here was somebody who saw the world completely differently to me and held the same values. And I thought that was really nice. I thought it was really wonderful how she said, you know, what's your thinking about AI? And I said, I'm avoiding it. I'm a writer. I have no time for it. I think it's a fad. And she said, absolutely not. It's amazing. You have to get into it. And I said, I can't speak to it. I'm not comfortable with it. They say everything before 35 is an innovation and everything after 35 is an inconvenience. And that's what it felt like. And I think her worldview is so incredible. She is so open-minded and so optimistic. And then I thought, if you have an AI cheerleader and you have an AI skeptic, then you can chart this perfect kind of middle ground. And I think that was one of the moments where she said, you're a learner, go learn it. And I can see what it can do. You need to too. So I don't want to speak for Rachel too much, but I think that was one. And then of course, life intervenes when you're in a school leadership position, when you're in a teaching position, and then you're needed as part of the sandwich generation, whether that's for care or whether that's other calls on your time. Something pulls you from the classroom, and it's not always a push factor. You're pulled. And I think one was family circumstances for me, and then two was this urgent need where I felt and Rachel was the one who probably made me realize this. Many of the voices in the space were coming from a financial imperative. They were tools, they were ideas, they were, you know, ways to monetize and build on the opportunity. And what I felt Rachel helped me see was that the voices that were needed were the people who lived and breathed curriculum, the people who really adored schools and wanted to preserve what's important and innovate responsibly. So I think she really helped me understand that. So that was the pull factor. And again, I don't want to speak for both of us, but when we came together, that's what felt like magic, that we can speak to feeling the time pressures on a school. We can feel that need of like, where do we find time or space in the curriculum? And why is this so urgent? And why is this different to other things we've seen before? So we could speak from a place of authenticity there. So I think that's what pushed from the classroom to this moment for me. Rachel?
I love the idea that you talk about you came both with very different perspectives and values, but you believed in the same thing. And I think in this day and age, that's something we really need to celebrate, because people come with different values and perspectives and tend not to get along. So I just think that's really rich to see how you're really taking that opportunity to have two very different people that see the world differently, but this common belief that you shared about the authenticity and being very grounded in what teachers can do. So thank you so much, Rita. And Rachel.
Yeah, and I think really Rita helped me realize this desperate need that if you were a school leader right now, today, there's this desperate need for support. And how are you meant to actually do all of this research when you're working full-time in a school? Right? Like, how are you going to research AI and understand it well, and then think about the strategy and think about the implementation or your school's position around AI? So I think that was one of the tipping points. And I think, Rita, our personal situations allowed for this as well. You know, we both have wonderful, loving partners who are able to financially support our family so that we can go do something challenging like this. I think that helps, of course. And then this sort of, I feel like we're almost a perfect duo in the sense of Rita is such an incredible pedagogue, and I have a very business mindset driven. I really get challenged and intrigued and excited about supporting someone else with just that learning aspect around business. I really enjoy that. And so I think us two coming, we just knew we were meant to be. And we were like, should we get married? I don't know.
You might want to talk to your partners first.
Yeah, I think us as the perfect sort of duo, plus we were both seeking in our professional lives great autonomy and great challenge. And so we thought, yes, let's do this. That was it for us.
Fantastic. And I think it's so important because we have what we call edupreneurs. They're the education entrepreneurs, educators that pivot to a new journey of professional exploration and start generating an income. Do you think that as you were starting to do that, there's a lot of talk about women entrepreneurs and women in leadership and women in business. For you, what were maybe some of the challenges, not because you were women, but because maybe you didn't have that experience of doing something like this? And what were some of the things that challenged you, maybe just professionally, personally, and maybe even philosophically? what were some of the things that you experienced as you began, and maybe are still, because you are somewhat in the journey. You're not new, but you're in the beginnings, if I may use that term, of this journey. Love to hear what were some of the maybe the personal, professional, or philosophical challenges that you encountered each.
I'll start as well, and I'll just keep it brief, but I think for me, I really like to ground who I am in humility. I think that's how Rita is as well. And so we did face that imposter syndrome, and I guess maybe it's a male, female, maybe it's a gender thing, maybe it's not, but I do think the AI space right now is really, really flooded with a lot of male voices who are unapologetic, and they're loud, and that's okay because they are who they are. But we were nervous to step into that space. I think for sure. I think that was difficult for us. It's not difficult anymore. We've gotten over that. So luckily, Rita, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that's valid. I think it is definitely observable that many either vendors or providers or consultants can often be guilty of coming in and pointing at the obvious and then leaving schools hanging. And I think that bit I was worried about. I didn't want anyone to perceive me differently because we were now in a very different role. People know me either as a writer or they know Rachel in terms of her development. And I think that's something you want, authenticity above all else, right? And as soon as you're selling something, whether it's yourself or a product or an idea or a value, then you worry that people will receive it wrong somehow, that it will impact your relationships or your reputation. And I think that made me very nervous. It's probably tied in to imposter syndrome, I'm sure. But it's understandable that there were moments when I thought, well, why would anyone want to hear from me? And then Rachel would shake me and say, of course you do. And then she would say, we need to scale up. And I would say, well, we need to have the right thing to scale. And all of these things are great conversations to have if you have a complete open relationship of culture and sharing and communication. But I think it's the idea of an edupreneur meets mompreneur, or whatever these words are, all of these ideas of hybrid roles. We have multiple micro identities, and what's really nice is that we have built whatever we need it to be at any given time. We kind of mold the world around us, and AI makes that possible. Certainly technology makes that possible. Friendship and openness and human connection makes that possible too. And all of those things have to work in harmony. So yeah, loads and loads of problems, loads and loads of concerns. But for us, ultimately, it's about navigating the way through those and making it work for us and our families and our minds, because that's what's most important. Is if we don't have true thoughts to share, then we're all wasting our time.
I think it's interesting you brought up 2 points. First is this imposter syndrome. We've had Kim Cafino and Christine that wrote a wonderful book on women in leadership. And a few weeks ago, we had the Women in Ed coordinators for Europe, Liz Free and Nancy Scucciarini, that both talked about, this issue of imposter syndrome. And I've had the privilege of mentoring and coaching women leaders, and that often comes up. And so I think it is unfortunate. And I love the way you said, okay, we'll just keep going anyway. And if that's the label, let that label be there, but we're going to be beyond it. The other thing I think is really true, the 9 biggest companies, they say there are 9 big AI companies, they're all run by men. And I think your point's a very important one. And it tends to be, we're getting a little gender here, but a lot of these companies led by men are very loud, somewhat build up hype, and quite obnoxious maybe, or quite aggressive in their approach. And I think having women in that space is so important. And there's some great organizations like Women in AI, and there are a lot of organizations, grassroots, that are starting to realize this is so important, making sure that women's voices are in these spaces, especially as you both are working with teachers and students. We want to amplify that, because having AI already has a lot of problems with bias, racism, and gender issues. And so having at the grassroots level, having women involved and also in a leadership position, that's so important. Now, when you started, you could have picked many different topics in education, because you come with a prolifery of experiences and leadership, and you really know schools and you've worked in schools. why AI? Was it just an obvious thing, or was there something about AI you thought that's a little different from maybe doing curriculum or mathematics or leadership capacity or whatever one can, create based on a long experience, deep experience in being in international schools?
Rachel, do you want to take that, or shall I?
Go ahead.
I think, honestly, it could be two things. It could be genuine need. If we think about where the ultimate urgent need was, it struck both of us. So Rachel, in her previous work, was dealing with speakers and hearing the main themes emerge, and also noticing the absence of themes of the important topics to discuss. And I was hearing it from the other side. I was hearing it from other school leaders who, as we know, school leaders are, well, certainly I was always worried about where the next problem was coming from. What was the next email of urgent need? What was the next panic? What was, always anticipating and spinning plates? And I think for me, I could see AI coming when I heard other school leaders, other coordinators, people panicking about, okay, now I need to reference AI, but what does that mean? And who's using it, who's not using it? And I hear there's a law coming. What do I do about this law? And I'm being sold 1,000 tools. I don't even know where to start with questioning them, and just panic. And I'm used to kind of, the turbulence of school life and the excitement and the biorhythm of high and low and our usual complaints and all of those things. And this felt different. This felt really, really acute. And it felt, to a certain extent, as when I thought it through to what it means for assessment, what does it mean for curriculum, it felt very different. For anyone who's lived through ed tech, or, we got through the Google problem, we got through the Wikipedia phase, we got through all of those things, and eventually there was a solution. And this felt slightly different. So I think that's where I felt like if we could do good, if we can support people, if we can help, that's the area in which I think brings the most benefit, most opportunity for us to share our message, and probably, to be not first to market, but certainly a valuable contribution in the market. I think that's where we saw. But also, I guess it comes back to the unique position of somebody trying to look at it from all those perspectives. It's no longer, as a school leader, sometimes you always feel negatively that you only put your hand in your pocket when it's a legal risk or a reputational risk. And that's not where it should be. Somebody has to really safeguard the curriculum and the intent and all of that valuable learning. That's not a financial imperative. That's not something that screams for attention. And we felt that it was whispering for attention and that we could help that.
Nice.
Rachel.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned these topics that weren't being discussed. And I think you've unpacked so much of that research, and it's been exciting to learn more about those things. That's what was missing from all of the learning I was doing. AI ethics was missing. AI and safeguarding was missing. Really thinking about the competencies. And I know, John, you did some work with the ATLs, and how does this contribute to the learner profile or characters that we want our students to? So all of that really felt like it was missing to me. And I laughed when you asked the question, because you said, why did you choose AI? And we're also going, why did we choose AI? We also have AI fatigue. What have we done? But we truly saw it as a need. And if you're going to start a company, you need to address a need.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah.
But the fact is, you are coming into the space where AI we're going to say 3 years old. Yeah, it's 2025. We're going to 26. And I love your term whispers, that you were hearing these whispers from school leaders, and you were hearing it from your professional situation with speakers and stuff. How come people were still feeling this kind of creative tension, even though this technology has been out in the space and kids have been using it? And, I'm just curious, why do you think some of these whispers aren't being addressed, or are they being addressed in a way that's not really meeting the needs of the uniqueness of international school leaders and international educators, which is really it's a context unique to itself. So I'm wondering, what is it? Even though we have, and you can go online on YouTube, there's all kinds of PD, Coursera, MIT, I can name a million organizations that are providing workshops. What was it that you felt was not being addressed specifically?
Well, I think I can answer that first on the surface level, and then maybe, Rita, you can go deeper into the international education space. But I really, believe that it goes back to those 9 companies and the loud voices and all of the tools that they're trying to push and sell. And I think we're so inundated by tool after tool after tool and update after update after update. And we can't wait to save you hours of time because it's going to change your life. I think that that is really still swarming everywhere you go online. If you go on LinkedIn, it's everywhere still. And that also permeated into schools. And so I think that semi answers it. And then Rita, maybe you can speak specifically about to international education.
I think with international education specifically, they can often, and most schools would maybe not agree with this, but our international schools, particularly IB schools, are often resource rich and, like all other schools, time poor. And if I'm spending all day, every day, listening to podcasts on triple speed and skim reading research journals and all the things I never could do when I was in the school, because the urgent is always the enemy of the important. So I had things in front of me that had to be dealt with. I had human beings who wanted connection, and I had learning to preserve. And I think because of, like you say, this idea that the tech bros are selling, there's a financial imperative, tools, leading to dependency and eventually addiction, because then you corner the market. And, all of this model to drive efficiency, productivity, leading to a dependency. And I think that's something that I thought I could see the alarm bells there. And I think that's what the scale of the research that would be required for you to be able to sit back like we've done. And I've been able to absorb everything. I spent about a year trying to understand every single aspect about it. And in that year, I kept coming back to, okay, if I was distilling this for a school, if I'm filtering this for the essential only, the things that are static and the things that are dynamic, and what I would need to know as a school leader, that's what is valuable. Because I need somebody who I can trust, who I can say, okay, yes, I've read all of this. This much is noise, and this is signal, and this could potentially be where the future is. So we recognize that there is a huge amount of manipulation online using AI, and it could look like this in safeguarding, and here's where it could look like in terms of knowledge preservation, and so that extrapolation is something that I never would have had the luxury to do in schools. And outside of schools, I certainly wouldn't necessarily trust an enterprise who's selling me an AI to honestly appraise all those benefits and risks. And I think that's what's important in an international school where we have extremely dynamic populations, diversity of thought about AI. We have some parents who don't want their kids near it. We have other parents who expect it to be used because how are you going to prepare my child for the future otherwise? So we have to understand that there's a spectrum of needs and a spectrum of motivations. And that's where I think the value comes in.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting how you describe this idea of the spectrum, because I think there is such a big spectrum, and it's really hard to come with one size fits all. And I think, and the other thing you were both alluding to is this idea of noise. There are just so much swarms of new tools, and every day you turn around and it feels exhausting. Some pundits will say that's done on purpose because they don't want you to notice what's actually happening. Because, if you're overwhelmed with too much, you just shut down. And we are definitely seeing on the ethical level, you brought up ethics, Rachel, is this whole switch from the way content moderation is changing. And organizations like OpenAI that blatantly say, we are not going to monitor like we did before. We're going to be far more open. Meta now really is using this idea of community notes where people have to kind of monitor themselves if they're being appropriate or not. So I think your point is so important. Now, one of the things that if we go online and go to your website, you're focusing on the IB. Now, some people would be saying, but not all international schools are IB. So on top of being an AI, you've created another niche in some ways. Talk to me a bit about that. Why not something more broad where any international school, one doing AP, IGCSE, or even there are a lot of bilingual schools, maybe doing a French baccalaureate or the German Abitur, or any of these international schools around the world that you see that have multilingual approaches to exams and are comfortable doing different types of exams. You are very clear, IB. Why?
Yeah, well, I think, and you mentioned edupreneurs. So for all the edupreneurs listening out there, if you're going to start a business, you should probably very clearly define your target market. And so that's what we're doing. We're clearly defining the target market. And the reason why we chose IB is because we both love the IB, and we both loved teaching the IB, and we know how it feels when you finally start to teach really incredible guided inquiry in your classroom and you go, they get it, right? We know that feeling. We know what it looks like in a classroom. We know how it feels, and we know why people love the IB. And so that was why would we not do the IB? Because we both love it so much. So yes, supporting those schools, but in that we know that IB is really good teaching and learning, isn't it? So a lot of what we're doing, and especially, for example, a school that just has the DP program, well, how can we support the other teachers who aren't teaching the DP, right? What we're really doing with a lot of the professional development as well is making it agnostic too for other international schools. Rita, did you want to add anything to this?
No, only that I think you're underselling the fact that Rachel has always tried to keep my mind open that if, so for example, we've been writing a book for AI for international school leaders, and originally, of course, I wrote it for IB school leaders because that's who I know and that's who I can speak to. And both Rachel and the publisher made me open it up to international school leadership. And then when we started to write and consider an AI curriculum, then I automatically tried to align it to the IB. And she said, no, we need to make sure that it's agnostic and flexible without being lacking in detail. So this idea that, yes, absolutely, what we're doing works for IB schools. There's no reason why it could be, we could disentangle it from the IB and it can be certainly more flexible. My husband, every time he comes back from squash, having had a conversation with someone, is always telling me, oh, they need this in banks. Oh, they need this in school. He always has another use case for me, because I guess the EU AI Act coming in and the fact that every single person working in AI probably in Europe will need to have some kind of AI literacy training and an understanding of the risks and a really good grasp of the ethics involved. That's massive. It's absolutely huge. And it's not specific to IB schools, but it is certainly the world that we know. So maybe we need to think bigger, think global. But right now, we're happy.
I think you have a point, because the inquiry approach, even if you're not an IB school, and Rachel, you use the example, you're working with a school, they only have the DP program, but you can still provide a lot of value and guidance to everybody else that might be doing more a local curriculum or something that they've generated themselves. So I think I definitely agree. I think the IB comes with so many very powerful ideas, and this idea of inquiry and agency. I think these things really are so important. So if the IB is all about agency, we're just going to pick the agency word because that's the one that you hear a lot, students have agency. We're going to give you agency. It feels like it's a chocolate or something, but
I want some.
You want some. Yeah, everybody wants some, but the problem is not as everybody is getting it. Isn't AI counterintuitive to agency? Is if you look at children and young adolescents and even educators, where the first really interaction is going to be, I give you a question, you give me an answer. I give you a question, you give me an answer. And, oh, the answer is not that right, so I'm going to rewrite the question. And for a lot of kids, it's like, okay, this is a shortcut. I know Dan, in one of our interviews, was talking about his nephew that said, this is the best thing. I'm going to, he's been so successful at school because the situation, the way things are structured, it's all about answers. So, hey, very easy. Go into ChatGPT, it will give you an answer. So I'm wondering, what can we do? Because if it really, the idea is that we're trying to subcontract out thinking to an AI to alleviate the pain and the stress of having to think ourselves. But if you think of the IB, it's really, no, we want critical thinking, problem solving, questioning, perspective. So I'm curious, how are you addressing that without giving state secrets away, that you are addressing that? Because that's a big issue, and that keeps coming up, is, are we stopping to think?
Rachel, if I give a little, I'll give a little context first, and then you answer the deeper question again, Rita. But we started kind of thinking about first professional development for teachers, and then we kind of backed up and thought, how does this affect leaders too? So we're really looking at coming together with leadership teams and learning about professional development, but then also doing professional development with teachers. But we kept going back to this idea of, what about students? What needs to be specifically defined in the students' world when it comes to what they're doing, and what learning do we hold near and dear, and what learning do we want to protect with AI in our lives? So that's kind of our product model, is that we're doing a lot of professional development, but now we've got this curriculum. And Rita, I'm sure you're going to start to speak to the curriculum now as you answer the question, I'm assuming.
Well, yes. And I think that's what Rachel always tells me when she disagrees. Yes, and no, the most important.
You guys
I think
do
it's
improv?
No, we should. That's our next business, John.
Okay,
Find us in
great.
2030.
Okay, you can join my improv troupe. It's called Unscripted Neil. Come and see us.
It's a productive tension that we have, and we like it. No, I think it's no coincidence that the AI world is obsessed with agents, right? They have co-opted that word in the interest of dependency, in the interest of success, and it's being, I guess, repackaged and sold back to us as productivity and efficiency. And I think, yes, I'll talk about the curriculum in a second, but I think what led us to the need for an agnostic, a flexible, a meaningful curriculum or supports or PD, all of those things, was the feeling that discussion, that protection moment, that discernment for students, that dependency for teachers, that mediocrity acceptance that we're seeing now in terms of AI outputs. And you wrote a really nice article about this, didn't you, John, about, you know, how quickly AI seduces you into cognitive offloading, and now we're seeing memory offloading, and we're seeing it in adults who have those muscles already defined, and we're seeing it in students who don't. And I think that's the worrying part. So when we wanted a name, we chose Eblana because that is the pre-Roman name for Dublin, and it was the source of where we would send monks and, you know, nuns and the religious orders across Europe to found educational institutions, to spread knowledge and to preserve knowledge. And then when the fires of the Middle Ages and the rampaging came, they would protect the sacred texts with their lives. And the only records we have then of ancient Greek and civilization in certain aspects, whatever we call civilization, is due to those people who thought this is worth protecting. This is the knowledge that matters. And I think that's where the agency, if we want to protect human agency, and if we want a sustainable, ethical AI, then we have to model that for students. And if we don't know that yet, if we're also learning at the same pace and sometimes slower pace than the students are, then I think that's something where people would really benefit from guidance. So we've without giving away trade secrets, obviously, but this idea of AI curriculum is, okay, here are the functionalities, here are the things you consider, these are the ethical implications, and this is what the future might look like. And that's required a great deal of thought. And that's really required pedagogy, philosophy, underpinnings of extrapolating what it could look like eventually. And if we really value knowledge, and if we really value the custodianship of skills and competencies from one generation to the next, how do we AI enable that, and how do we AI proof that? And that's really, really important. And I think that's the part of the conversation that we felt was missing, that the idea of who's preserving what's worth preserving and innovating what's worth innovating.
And I think that's so important, because if you don't have that conversation, then especially as the technology improves and this whole AGI, artificial general intelligence, comes about, etc., we are going to really lose sight of that. And I think your point is so important, is how, you know, the tools, I agree, like you said, you can teach about the tools, but this ethical conversation and what are the human dispositions that make us so unique, that of critical thinking, of having opinions and perspectives, and this idea of wanting to be agentic in our own beliefs and philosophies and values is so important. Schools, I would say, and I'm no expert, but we tend to struggle with those conversations, because often they take a lot of time. You teach a kid how to use Google Drive, bingo, they know how to use Google Drive. Very easy, black and white. But when you are thinking about something as nuanced as ethics, the deliverables are much more complex and not that obvious. Why do you think we have always found that more difficult? Okay, there's TOK, there are certain isolated courses that really do a good job, but generally schools, I'm not hearing many schools having deep conversations about AI ethics. I might be completely wrong. So, you know, I can be shot down here, but that's my gut feeling. And I'm curious what both of you think.
I go first. So I think it comes back to the urgent is the enemy of the important. I don't think it's lack of will. And I don't necessarily at the moment think it's lack of information. A year ago, I think maybe it would have been lack of information, that we didn't yet see the motivation in terms of data protection or the geopolitical push to deregulate anything to do with AI, as we're seeing in the US, for example. So I don't think we saw those patterns, malicious or not, ill-intended or not. I don't think we saw how that would reach into education, because assessment was shouting for attention. It was, how are we going to protect the veracity, the reliability, and the validity of assessments? And that just took over. That took all the oxygen from the room, I think. And as quick as we were to hope that detection would come along and watermarking AI would fix things, that took up so much bandwidth that there was no time to think about, until something would happen, that we think about the manipulation of young people using AI, or the idea that now we need to, I like your word nuance, that we need students to be able to exist with nuance and not accept what's very convincing looking or sycophantic or all of these other emotional dimensions of AI. We didn't have time. We didn't have time for it. I think we didn't have enough learnings, and we didn't have enough opportunity to talk about those things. And like I say, Rachel and I can talk about them all day because we have small children and we're thinking, how will this look for them as they go through their education? So we have yet another perspective, I think, to think about. So I don't think that schools don't want to have these conversations. Every time we speak to a school, every time we're working in a school, it's always because they didn't know what they didn't know. And it's simply that. They didn't have time to consider to the nth degree, what does it look like if we offload all of our performance of understanding? What if we fully adopt AI tutors and we end up in a world of personalized learning and nobody ever gets exposed to something new or novel or challenging? What if we decide to live in a friction-free world where nobody has to have a productive struggle of any kind? What does that mean for humanity? I never had time to have that conversation in the school. I might have thought it while, on a car drive or in the shower, but certainly there would never be a moment to sit down and go, you know what, I do worry about. That's just not the way school life lives. We did do it before we had emails. I do remember teaching before email, and that was a bit more what happened. But now I can't imagine that situation in a normal, functioning, busy staff room.
Yeah, and I like your anecdote about how AI assessment took the oxygen out of the room, because for the IB and any educators that were all about sharing content and then this exam to confirm that you understood the content and you can apply it, that definitely, and the watermarks and the detections, we know now that actually that was a pipe dream and that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And if there's some out there, I would not be convinced that they're that foolproof. But so that's a really good point you bring up, is about, how much capacity do we have and how much space in our heads? And, I think, as you said, the first gut reaction was assessment. Rachel, your thoughts?
Yes, the first gut reaction was assessment, but I think you asked about schools and where they're at. We've spoken probably in 6 months to over 80 schools, John, which is a crazy number. We never thought that so many would be reaching out and talking to us. And I believe this through and through as an educator myself. Educators and schools want the very best for kids. We always do. We always do, and it's very hard to have these conversations, because you ask schools, what have you done? What have you done in terms of AI so far? What has it been like for you? And they're frantic. The conversations are frantic, and it's around, we've developed a policy, we've tried, we've done a poster, because again, they haven't had the capacity or the time to unpack this well. But every time I bring up AI and safeguarding, or AI and ethics, or really thinking forward about what does this look like in our classrooms, they go, oh yes, okay, that's good. We should be doing that. And they always want the best. They just haven't had the capacity to do so. So I think, shout out to the schools out there who are doing their best in this situation, because it has been chaotic, and it's a lot.
Yeah. And I would say generally in schools, because we work with human beings who are delicate and we care for them, and children, we want to make, as you say, we want only the best for them. If this accelerated change keeps coming, once you focus on one thing, next day it's gone and there's something new. And I think your point is just, how do you create the spaces? I assume you both are using AI. So I'm curious, could you do this without AI? Start a business nowadays without AI?
Yes.
Could you?
Of course,
you grow it as a business?
No. I think I was lucky to have started a business 3 years ago as well. My own. It's a very small company. It's a business to consumer, so B2C, and this obviously is different because this is a B2B for the entrepreneurs again out there. I probably am now moving 10 times faster, to be fair. Genuinely,
So
I think
let's
that would be,
unpack that.
yeah,
So Rachel, you're moving 10 times faster. So
yeah.
before you had your business to customers, and 3 years ago, I assume you might have started using AI, but it was not front and center. So it was maybe more labor intensive, longer hours. Maybe you weren't as efficient. Now you're saying 10 times as, what can you do 10 times better or faster than you did before now that you have AI?
I think one example that really stood out to me, we're lucky to have, we've got some grant funding. We've been backed by the Irish government. So under that grant, we get a lot of support. So we have a business mentor who I was speaking with, and we were talking about, you know, all different opportunities to work with other companies and what that looks like, and what does integration look like? What is, you know, what does revenue share look like? What are different models? And I think that entire, so I put a massive prompt into Gemini Deep Research, massive prompt, and it came back with this amazing answer. And I actually showed that back to our business mentor, and he said, "Holy cow, wow!" Like he couldn't believe it. And I said, "Don't you feel like this would have taken me 10 years to learn?" And not just 10 years of reading, it would have taken 10 years of interactions and 10 years of really trialing and error. And of course, I'll still have those moments. You know, we will trial and error, and it might not work out exactly as, of course, it's not going to work out the way that exactly that the deep research is telling me, but at least it gives me a very good understanding of the space I'm in now in a B2B company, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. No, and I use deep research, and it is phenomenal. It's phenomenal how powerful it is. And I think, you know, Ethan Mollick really talks about that it's a new type of research. It's not replacing research, but now you suddenly have this whole arc, you have this whole asset in front of you that's digested in a way that you can actually start actioning things maybe in a much more accelerated way. And yeah, absolutely. I can't disagree with you more. Rita, your thoughts on, are you also working 10 times faster? Or there, I'm not that you're working faster, but there is kind of this, not explosion, but there is this amplification that maybe you did not have before.
I think it's in terms of input. I think I'm thinking at the same rate, and I think I'm writing ever so slightly faster, but I would have a very different perspective. I think I am slightly obsessed with the sustainable cost of AI. So I have a heavy dose of Catholic guilt every time I use it. I worry about my mental cognition, and I worry about my writing skills, and I have a very kind of much more, I'll use it when it adds value approach, I think. And Rachel does that too. I don't say that, but I think she's more experimental than I am. I worry that if I'm going to prompt something, if I'm going to do a deep research, then I want it so perfect that I get it right first time. And that's not always possible with AI. So but I use it judiciously. In fact, you know, sometimes I say it's literally the only diet I'm on is my energy diet, because I worry so much about the idea that we have turned a blind eye to the energy cost of all of this reckless experimentation and this reckless adoption, and that we have to pay the bill somehow in CO2, and we have to pay the bill. Dublin has this issue at the moment where 55% of our grid is being used by, or, you know, dedicated to the data centers, and that's up from 5% last year. That's massive. That's incredibly intense. And ignoring that energy cost comes, I think, it sits uneasily. So, but I also can't resist the efficiency. So one thing I always like to do with a model, you know, I always test it with something that I'm really good at and something that I'm really bad at, and that will help me to fine tune whether this is a good model for me, or whether the usage will be beneficial. So if I can find a really good use case, it can accelerate me. But I think the rest of the acceleration has come from, I'm constantly learning, I'm constantly absorbing. Mm-hmm. That's where the speed and the information I have access to now is incredible. Yeah. But it isn't making me work faster. Maybe I write slightly faster, but I wouldn't say much faster. But having said that, no, we wrote 15 courses in 2 months. So yes, maybe it is making me much faster, and I'm not giving.
That's pretty good. Having written many courses, I would say that's pretty good. Yeah. Thank you for bringing up the sustainability. This is a huge issue, and, you know, just the water issue, and now, you know, nuclear energy. There's just so many. That's a whole podcast. That could be like a whole year of podcasts. And thank you for bringing that up, because I think sometimes in the nectar that we drink from the faucet of AI, we forget that how many milliliters of water for every query is. And if you go online, The Guardian's done some really interesting work in this area. So thank you both for sharing those perspectives. Now, imagine I'm two young educators and I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, oh, now that there's AI, it's going to be much easier because I'm going to have a third partner. I'm going to have this sparring partner, and they have this wealth, they have the world at their feet, and I'm going to be able to accelerate some of these adoption, some of this development. What would be a caution if somebody starts thinking about that? Think of yourselves. What are some of the cautions about, oh yes, AI is amplifying, we're working 10 times faster, we can do this deep research. What might be some cautions for people thinking about leveraging AI to start a business in a small scale like yourselves?
Well, I think it goes back again to that cognitive offloading and the use case. Like, you have to choose, you're still doing a lot of the thinking, and you have to remember that you have to be in charge of the thinking and the direction, right? And if you're not, then that's not going to go well for you. And people can see immediately if something was made with AI. Like, now I can read something and I know no one checked this right before they posted it, right? So I think they have to be cautious of looking like AI slop. But also choosing their use cases wisely and making sure that they still have those critical thinking tools to actually figure out how they're going to use it as a tool, and how and what all the different ways are to actually enhance what you're doing, and not deter from the business as well. Rita, did you want to add something to that?
No, I think probably I can't speak to the business side as much as Rachel can. She has had the brain for that. And I think I always just am the worrier. I worry that the churn, if the future for our students is a world of job insecurity due to AI or due to AI agents, then the skills become absolutely everything. And a churn, a burning through of human workers in favor of digital workers, what does that look like? But I think if you are at the right moment and you have a great idea for business and education benefits from that, and human learning is preserved, then that's the magic formula. But I don't think if you were a brand new young teacher with a great idea, nothing should stop you. Absolutely not. And AI can only accelerate that. But you need to have an evaluation metric. I know we know software engineers have evals and they monitor whether things work as they were expected to. That, I think we need more of that with AI outputs, and evaluating whether something is really, really useful or whether it's mediocre. And the acceptance of mediocrity is something that definitely worries me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up the word slop, and yeah, it's shortcuts, and humans love shortcuts, right? And we I don't think we're generally lazy, but a shortcut's always very helpful, especially when you're in a world as educators where there's so much going on. Report cards, you have a field trip, you have 20 parents that are unhappy because some kid hit another kid, etc. It goes on and on and on. You have Eblana Learning. We're not going to go into state secrets, but this is a service because I think it's important, because people will be like, oh, they're talking, but what do they actually do? So maybe tell us in a nutshell, as an AI summary, sorry, I'm being silly here. What are you offering? So I'm a school, I call you up, what do you offer?
We're supporting leadership teams and teachers with the professional development and the professional learning they need to make sure their school is AI safe, it's AI informed, and they feel AI empowered. So that's the professional learning that we offer to schools. And that looks like it can be in person, it can be virtual modules, or we also offer it as an academy, so asynchronous learning that the school can take and reflect and unpack and figure out how it's going to work in their school. And all of what we're doing is very bespoke. So we're coming up with best policies, but also best use cases and frameworks and best practices for the school to carry forward and use in their whole school as a school-wide, just also to support students, right? If they have one certain framework that they're using in terms of assessment, it's going to really support the school. So that's what we're doing in terms of professional learning. And then our AI curriculum is going to launch next month. So be on the lookout. We're looking for some schools that want to be a part of the early adopters cohort of the curriculum. And this is a K-12 fully articulated curriculum. Of course, it underpins a lot of the things that we value in the IB, but it's not necessarily for IB schools only. Now we've kind of gone into any international schools are more than welcome to look at and utilize the curriculum to support the student learning. And also, coming really quickly back to the sustainable, two things that we're doing, which is very exciting that listeners might want to hear about. But we have a sustainable AI use course, actually. So Rita's done the research on the sustainability and unpacked it into a course. It's totally free. So John, maybe you can put it in the show notes if people want to look into that course. It's about an hour.
Yes, send it to me, and yeah, perfect.
Yeah, and Rita is also writing she mentioned it briefly earlier, but it's the International School Leaders Guide to AI, and that's going to be published by Hachette beginning early 2026. So that's going to be a really incredible unpacking of the work that we do in leadership teams, which we look at the 6 risks that AI is bringing to schools, and how can we look at those from what we call the Eblana 6 Ps framework. So how do we look at those and assess our readiness and then come up with an implementation plan moving forward for our school?
Fantastic. So for many of our listeners, this is the beginning of a new school year. We're mid-August. You might have started, but if you haven't, definitely go to the show notes and you can get more information and even links. So if you want to engage with how Rachel and Rita are supporting schools, it might be something you want to connect with for sure. We're coming to the end of our podcast. We always ask each of you to share something. What do you want to say to a student, and what do you want to say to an educator? An educator, we include teachers and leaders together. What would be some words of wisdom or a reflection as we wrap up this wonderful conversation today? So I'll let whoever, a student and then an educator, and thinking kind of the dual role of a leader and an educator, a teacher. What is something you want them to walk away with?
I think, if you don't mind, Rachel, if I go first, I think the thing that most surprised me in the last few weeks was the emergence of a friction between teachers and students that I'd never seen before. So teachers using AI and students feeling neglected or hard done by that, and really resenting teachers' use of AI. So I think if I could say anything to both of those people, it would be, let's build really ethical disclosures around AI and honest, truthful conversations about how we're using it, when we choose to use it, and what we do with the outputs. Because I think there is a real sadness in a student feeling like no human read their work. Now, potentially we want to avoid a world in which they used AI for the answer and then AI graded the answer, and then that's just a meaningless endeavor. But if we could have honest conversations now around disclosure, around best uses and inappropriate uses of AI beyond just assessment, I think that would make us all feel much more collaborative, because it's true that we are working and learning it all together in real time, but we're still the ones modeling it for students. So that is really, really crucial. So I think that would be my message to both. So students, be honest in your use, and teachers model it honestly and authentically. And that's very hard to do when it is a shortcut, and when it is a sneaky little trick, or when it is, so many things that it can be. But that would be my thinking point to leave teachers and students on.
Excellent. Yeah, and you're seeing actually a fair amount of research surveys, student surveys coming out, and that is being amplified. So thank you for that, Rita. Rachel.
This immediately made me think of my own 2 young children when you asked the question. And so I'll answer both together. What would I say to an educator and a student, or a student, both of them, the same answer? We have to start defining what we value and what we care about most in life. And for me, that's disconnecting and being with my kids. And, we play a game in Dutch. It's called Mensen erger niet. It's like the sorry game with, just playing board games and being together and connecting and spending time together and talking with one another. And so what is it that you value as a human? And how are you going to set very clear boundaries and very strong boundaries around those things you value as we move forward? And so I think that's what everybody needs to do right now. The world's moving so fast and we're being inundated. I mean, it's addicting too, right? And so how do we figure out what do we care about, and then move forward, and then let AI be in our lives in the way that we want, to that control over it.
Absolutely. And I think your point is so important, this idea of being disconnected. I mean, it took us 10 years or 20 years to realize that the phones were bad. So let's hopefully not wait that long to see some of the more challenging aspects of artificial intelligence, especially in the context of having young children. Rita and Rachel, thank you so much. I want to remind our audience, if you are curious, it's Eblana Learning, eblanalearning.com. It's in the show notes. And there are also Rita and Rachel's LinkedIn and some other resources that you can tap into. So make a point of spending some time as we go into a new academic year. And Rita and Rachel, we can't wait to like hook up in a year's time when every school has an Eblana Learning graduate. That is fantastic and super exciting. For the audience, I want to thank people again. So many people are connecting to our LinkedIn, and every week we have more people joining, so we really appreciate that. And it's always a real privilege to have guests like Rachel and Rita. So if you are enjoying these conversations, go to your favorite podcast, give a star, a comment, and your feedback is very precious to us, and we appreciate that you're interacting with us on social media or just through LinkedIn. That's a kind of our go-to place for the International Schools Podcast. So both of you, thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom, and we wish you all the best with Eblana Learning as you move forward. And schools are very fortunate to have educators and thinkers like you that are out there making sure we're having those important conversations about ethics and safety and balance, and really reminding ourselves the importance of humanity and the human person in this narrative. So thank you both for being on the International Schools Podcast.
Thanks so much for having us,
Thank
John.
you, John.